To get the Big Buck Registry after show and other exclusive content right now, go to patreon.com/Big Buck Registry. Today on Deer Hunt.
As I start going in there, he's poised with an AR-15 aimed at me, but he has a state police campaign hat on as the gun goes off and hits me the first round in the badge. I had no idea what happened. I felt like I got hit by a 12-gauge shotgun is what I thought. And it hits my badge, goes into my bicep and out my shoulder, and my arm drops into my lap.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 294. Wayne Saunders, Warden's Watch, Game Thieves, and North Woods Law, Part 1. Support for the Big Buck Registry and the Deer Hunt Podcast comes from -33 Merino Wool Layering System, keeping you warm on the coldest days while staying breathable and wicking away moisture on the wet ones. Rackology, everything you need in one bag. Now available at Rural King and Orslin Farm and Home storefronts or online at www.rackology.org. Grizzly Ears, the most advanced engineered wireless earbuds for the outdoors. Covert scouting cameras, remote cameras for hunting, wildlife, and security. Grizz Friction Wood Calls, custom-made calls that sound as good as they look. And Big Buck merch. You can get cool, high-quality Big Buck t-shirts, long-sleeve t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. And show support for this podcast by visiting bigbuckmerch.com. That's bigbuckmerch.com.
This is Chris Cordell from Memphis, Tennessee with Cordell's Hunting Products. You're about to listen to my favorite deer hunting podcast, Big Buck Registry.
Hey, this is Christian Williams from Archery Strong, and you're listening to one of my favorite podcasts, the Big Buck Registry.
Hello, this is Cuz Strickland with Mossy Oak, and you're about to listen to the podcast that I listen to 16 and a half hours nonstop. The Big Buck Registry is the best out there.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen and fellow predators. My name is Jay, and thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. For Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller and the entire staff here at the Big Buck Registry, welcome to the show. There are a couple things I'd like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please check us out on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and leave us a review. With your help, we're going to try and push this show up the iTunes charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to leave a review and subscribe to the show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access and notification each and every week that a new show is released. You can also access this show in its entirety on YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, "Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry." It's all right there for you to access on demand at your fingertips. Regarding the harness program, we're out of harnesses. We need your help. Anybody that has spare harnesses, please send an email to jay@bigbuckregistry.com. In a 23-year celebrated career filled with wild stories and tales of game warden lore, the beginning started with one of the biggest tragedies on New Hampshire soil. As a conservation officer, Wayne Saunders caught many a poacher and became a regular on North Woods Law. Now Wayne often reflects on his duties as lieutenant while interviewing conservation officers from around the country on his latest retirement project, a podcast called Warden's Watch. This is part 1 of Wayne's story. Speaking of part 1, there's a part 2 that will be coming out in a couple weeks, but you can get it earlier and other bonus content by activating a superfan tier over at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/Big Buck Registry. If you go there right now, for just $2 a month, you can have early access to the second part of the show and any other shows where we have a part 2. And if you'd like, check out some of the other tiers. You might like them just as much. We'll get to our entire interview with Wayne in just one moment, but before we do, let's hear from our friends at -33 Merino Wool Products and Jim Keller with the Deer News. My experience started with a visit to the -33 headquarters in Ashland, New Hampshire, for a tour of the warehouse and factory, followed by an interview with John Glidden, the owner and CEO. John is a straight-shooting New Hampshire Yankee, if ever there was one, and that straight-shooting attitude reflects in his product. It's high-quality stuff that does exactly what the company says it will do. After a steady hike on a cold November day up the backside of a steep New Hampshire ridge, with the sun setting and the temps dropping, I wasn't soaked with sweat. Because of the -33 merino wool base layer, I was comfortably warm and dry and itch-free. Any perspiration was wicked away from my body, and my human scent was neutralized from the natural properties that the wool brings to the table. I was thankful that I was wearing that exact base layer when that dominant buck appeared. Rest assured, I'll be wearing my minus 33 merino wool base layer next year when the temperatures start to drop. I'd encourage you to check out minus 33 for yourself. Visit www.minus33.com, that's MINUS 33.com, and grab some base layers for the rest of this season or next. And please let them know you heard about them on the show by using the discount code BIGBUCK33 to get 10% off your next order.
Now here's Jim Keller with the deer news.
Our first story, New Hampshire dad suffocates coyote with bare hands after it attacked toddler. This story is from the Fox News website. A hero New Hampshire father suffocated a coyote to death with his bare hands after the beast attacked his child on Monday, police said. Ian O'Reilly was walking with his wife and 3 kids on a trail near Jude's Pond in Kensington around 11 a.m. when the wild animal jumped out of the woods and grabbed the 2-year-old child by the jacket. That's when the dad went into protection mode, kicking the coyote before choking it, said Kensington Police Chief Scott Kane. O'Reilly told local outlet WFXT that he was running on instinct and adrenaline when he wrestled the beast to the ground, eventually killing it after a 10-minute skirmish. There was no interest in it going away, so ultimately I had to make the decision to become the aggressor and jumped on it, attacked it, and was able to get it to the ground, O'Reilly said. When I was able to get on top of it, I put my hands around its snout so it wasn't able to attack me anymore, he recalled. From there, I shoved its head into the snow and then eventually was able to expire it through suffocation, he said. Ultimately, one hand on its windpipe and one hand on its snout did the trick. The dad was bitten in the arm and chest and is being treated for rabies as a precaution. The animal didn't break the toddler's skin thanks to his heavy-duty snowsuit. He's off the charts again. This deer made another amazing journey. This story is from the Mississippi Clarion Ledger website and was reported by Brian Broom. Buck number 27 stunned researchers last year when he traveled over 13 miles from his capture site and set up shop at another location for the winter. This year, the highly mobile deer did it again, and another buck in the study group may have traveled even farther. He was originally darted in August of 2018, said Colby Henderson, Mississippi State University graduate student. After we woke up, he just hightailed it out of there. He moved 13 miles. He stayed there until February and then came back to the same property we darted him on. The buck was part of a study conducted by MSU and the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. It began in 2016 when researchers selected 55 mature bucks in Madison and Yazoo counties near the Big Black River. Each buck was captured and then fitted with a GPS tracking collar and ear tags. The goal of the study was to monitor the buck's movement during the 2017 and 2018 deer seasons to see how they react to hunting pressure. Henderson said researchers involved in the study initially thought the extreme movement was caused by the adverse reaction to the capture because while some other bucks in the study exhibited mobile behavior and had 2 home ranges, none had dual home ranges that far apart. On average, Henderson said, other dual ranges were 3 to 5 miles apart. But then number 27 did the unexpected again. Almost 1 year to the day from when he was captured, he made the same journey to the area he spent the winter last year. Now researchers feel he truly has 2 home ranges that far apart, and the fact he vacated the capture site immediately after his capture was merely a coincidence. Buck number 27 is among the 10 deer with active collars, and researchers encourage hunters to harvest any collared buck they encounter and return the collars because 90% of the data collected is stored in them. So if you see one of these deers, don't hesitate to harvest it, and please return the collar. Unintended consequences, the comedy and tragedy of smartphones in the deer woods. This story is from the February 3rd National Deer Alliance newsletter email. In a December issue of our On Watch newsletter, we asked the NDA members to answer a few questions about their phone use when hunting and whether or not it has cost members an opportunity at a deer. The results, although may not be surprising, speak for themselves. Almost 90% of survey applicants use their phones in the field, and 60% admit to using it to pass time during slow periods. Overwhelmingly, most participants noted that they pack their phone primarily as a safety tool to stay connected to the outside world in case of emergency. Similarly, many participants noted that they use their phones to call for help to retrieve downed game. Still, some noted that they use their phones to communicate with fellow hunters, replacing the popular walkie-talkies of the past. Several participants also mentioned that they use smartphone mapping applications to navigate and mark their hunting locations, while others admitted to using phones to conduct business while on stand or simply to pass the time when the action is slow. But when asked if phone use ever impacted the hunt negatively, the majority, almost 85%, claimed that it had not. The NDA is a little skeptical of this claim and suspect that either NDA members are highly vigilant while on stand, or they have the natural gift of excluding certain details while recounting their hunting adventures. Still, the NDA did hear from some participants who had amusing and even heartbreaking stories of missed opportunities due to using a cell phone while hunting. One common theme was ringing phone or buzzing text just as a shooter buck showed up on the range, while many of the other participants admitted to looking up from the screen to find a deer that had seemingly appeared out of thin air. To read a couple of stories members shared, go to www.nationaldeeralliance.com and join. Membership is free, and it includes a subscription to their weekly On Watch newsletter. Keep an eye on your inboxes every Wednesday morning for a new issue featuring a news survey. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. Special thanks to Tim Donzie, Daniel Applebaum, and John Geis for leads on stories this week. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller for the Deer News. Without further ado, here is Wayne Saunders. Wayne Saunders, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Jay. Appreciate you having me on.
You're in the studio, man.
Yeah, live and in the studio. It's just a different feeling when you're, person to person than it is over a phone. It's got that personal touch, let's face it.
I do like a lot of the face-to-face interviews, but of course, when you're trying to get information from somebody halfway across the country and you don't have the budget to fly them in.
Yeah, no, I'm learning economically. That's the way to go. That's why I'm not making any money, man.
We're not Rogan yet, right? It's just not there. There's something special about being face to face because you can see facial expressions and things like that. You can also the audio is always better. No matter how hard you try to get on a Skype call or a Zoom call, it's always better. Right. So
no, definitely. And I like reading body language. That's, my whole career. I've been trained to read body language.
That's very interesting because that's one of my things I have in my notes about reading body language.
Yeah, that's what I like to do.
Yep.
And you can even get a game warden to have that deer in the headlight look when you ask a question. You're like, yeah, he doesn't want to go there. So guess where I'm not going to go. I don't want to make him uncomfortable. So we're gonna skirt that.
Interesting. I can't wait to hear all this.
Yeah.
Stuff. Well, let's talk about you, Wayne. You've got a backstory. It's a very interesting story about your life and your career with New Hampshire Fish and Game. You started out as where most people start out at Fish and Game, trainee, and then finished as a lieutenant, and recently retired and opened up your latest adventure in the podcasting business, which is kind of how we came together.
Exactly.
One day at Biederman's Deli up in Plymouth, New Hampshire, we sat down. It just snowed, and kind of told you what I knew, and you asked a bunch of questions, and here you are. You're in the podcasting industry just like I am.
Yeah, no doubt. With your help, for sure, because I don't think I'd be at this point without your expertise.
I thank you for bringing me along for the ride. It's been fun.
Yeah.
It's a very short ride already, but it's been great.
And I always get, people that comment on the quality of my podcast, and I say, because I got this great guy that produces my show, Jay Scott from the Big Buck Registry, he hits it, and he's all about quality, and that's what I wanted. And
I've beat you up a little bit over the last few months, saying, "Oh, we got to do this one better. This has to be quieter here."
Oh, when we first started, you were like, "Yeah, there's way too many ahs and ands, and what's that going to cost you for me to do it? You don't want to even know."
Right.
So I learned to cut ands and ahs and so's and buts and everything out of mine, and I try to communicate differently. It's going to be years doing that because, and there's that one of those words, because,
right,
which is a natural pause in the human person, which we don't even really recognize a lot, except when you're podcasting, and every one of those you're going to cut out or you're going to try to make it smoother. And now I'm listening to myself constantly and listening to others. And when you're on a podcast and they're making so many ahs and so's, and you're like, oh man, this is going to take a long time to edit.
The ahs and ums are just they're the nemesis of the podcast editor, and people who don't talk on a microphone frequently, you're going to hear that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a while to get out of it. You got out of it pretty quick.
No, I don't know about that. I'm still cutting a lot. That's why you don't see a lot.
Because you do the cutting.
I cut it. I don't want you to see how many ahs and ums. And
But guests will do it too. And even if they're another podcaster, you typically get some of that stuff.
No, it's your brain is trying to pause to catch up, to think to say something.
Right.
So now when you hear that long pause, for me, it's just dead silence. That's my brain trying to catch up now, instead of going.
Right.
And you know, I hate that word now. You know. No, you don't know. That's why I'm talking to you.
Right. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
No, I don't know what you're saying because you haven't said it yet. I can't read your brain. See, there's my right there. The pause. You created Warden's Watch podcast. Do you want to give me some backstory on why you decided to open up a podcast after a career at Fish and Game?
Well, I kind of say it in my intro. I got done being a game warden, and I wanted to be a game warden since I was 6 years old. And I accomplished that, and along the way, I got a lot of stories. I met a lot of people nationwide. I'm trying to figure out the next step because I'm young. I'm 49 when I retire. If anybody knows me, I can't sit still. I've always got to be working. I always got to be doing something. And thank goodness my wife understands this too. So I'm trying to create a business, and I'm like, what kind of business do I want to create? And I always hear, you got to do something you love, and it doesn't feel like work. Well, I did that, Jay. I was a game warden for 23 years.
You loved it.
Loved every second of it, and it's in my blood. I'm like, so why don't I? There's a so. So I tried to incorporate it into a business, and I'm trying to think of guiding and this and that, and nothing's really sticking until I go to a hunter education course, and this is towards the end of my career. And Jill, I always want to call her Kelly because that's her maiden name, but Jill, she's our our wildlife biologist up in Region 1. Jill Kilborn is her married name.
Kilborn, okay.
Talking to probably a couple hundred hunter education instructors. And she says, has many of you guys listened to the podcast Meat Eater? And she wants a raise of hands. And there's about 3 people out of 3, 200 or 300 people that raise their hand. And one of them's not me. And I'm like, what? I know what a podcast is, kind of. At least I like to think I do. And she starts talking about the Meat Eater podcast and how she's been sucked into listening to this. And I say, that's a good idea. So maybe people working with Northwoods Law, they love that show. 2 million people watching and growing all the time. Maybe they want to hear the game warden stories. Maybe they want a little more. Maybe they want the backstage, so to speak, of being a game warden. Sharing that, whether audioly, as they go back and forth to work, as they clean, as they work, getting those game warden stories, because some of them, we all have very unique stories, as you've found out.
As the editor, yes. There's some fascinating stories.
So, and to share those with people, it keeps me engaged with game wardens. It helps me promote them. It helps me promote wildlife. It helps me promote conservation. Everything that I have learned to love and have been doing all my career, it kind of brings it in together into a different aspect. And I always say Fish and Game trained me to talk. I was head of the Operation Game Thief program, had to do a lot of talking, get sponsors, do this, always talking, always speaking. Don't mind it. I love engaging people. I love people. I'm like, this is the next step, podcasting. So, I came and found you, and we opened it up, and last month 8,000 downloads in December in less than a year. I'm pretty happy with that. I think you are too. You were the one that pointed that out to me.
Yeah, it's podcasting is not easy to get big numbers right away because I think there's 300,000 podcasts worldwide, and from what I heard recently, they're about 5% are active, meaning that they've got some kind of longevity and they've lasted more than 7 shows.
Wow.
Yep. So if you think about that number, that's not that many.
I got longevity is what you're saying.
You've got longevity already. But on top of that, the stats show that you're not going to get much more than a couple hundred downloads a month. You've far surpassed that already. That's why I got so excited when I sent you that picture the other day. My stats, when I started compared to your stats, and the algorithm most likely has you way off the charts at some point down the road. So it takes time to get there, but your start is as strong as I think probably anybody has seen without being a mainstream celebrity.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. If I was Prince Harry, he's right off the charts now. If he only wanted to be a game warden, we'd be all set. I could interview him.
Right. So, looking at talking about Northwoods Law and your career, at the end of your career, you actually spent some time on Northwoods Law. You popped up on a few episodes. You want to talk about some of your experiences?
Yeah, I was actually, Eric Fluid and I were on the very first episode of New Hampshire Northwoods Law, very unexpectedly. It was a drowning in Arrow, New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. And as a lieutenant, I kind of, my own thing, I kind of managed the Northwoods Law guys, the camera crews, and I'd line them up and say, hey, where do you want to go? Who do you want to work with? And a weekday isn't a good day to be with a game warden usually because our activity's on weekends. This was a Wednesday. I'm pretty sure it was a Wednesday. I have to look back. Maybe it was a Monday. Yeah, it might have been a Monday. It was a weekday anyways, and it was like nothing going on. And I talked to Eric. I'm like, what do you got going on? And he actually had some plans. He had to seal some fur. He had to do some other things. So he had a good plan for the camera crew that day. And they film so much that they don't show. It's unbelievable. They'll spend all day, and none of that will get to film. It hits the floor in the scrap pile of the cutting room, so to speak. Not anymore. They don't do that, but they cut so much. It's unbelievable the amount of film they take compared to what they put out there.
Right.
And it gets towards the afternoon, the next thing I know, there's a drowning going on in Arrow, New Hampshire, and I know Eric's by himself, so I beat feet right up there, and he's got the camera crew with him, and they are there blow by blow, even from checking this guy prior to fishing. And Eric giving them a little warning, hey, the river's supposed to come up, be careful. Didn't mention not, you should wear a life jacket when you're going to get on the canoe and ride the rapids. But he was very, hey, just FYI. Did he do that for the cameras? Maybe, because I think sometimes you feel a little subconscious when there's a camera, especially when it started. Not so much you get used to it, believe it or not. But when you start, that first day, I'm sure Eric was very conscious of that camera. So he wanted to say the right thing, which he did. Be safe. Not that he wouldn't have normally said that, because he might have. Eric's very conscientious. And later that day, we get a call from a drowning. It's the same guy that he told to be careful. The river was coming up. It was a rainy day. They're fishing. They're having a good time. Yeah, just be careful. The water's supposed to come up that day. And we ended up in a full boat rescue, and that was the first one that aired with Northwoods Law in New Hampshire. They started off with that.
Was he in a canoe?
He was.
I remember that episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember him stopping and saying, hey, be safe. And the next thing you know, the canoe was coming from further up where the spot was, I think it was. And then ended up, they couldn't.
Yeah, there was two of them in it. They got capsized, and neither one had life jackets.
Yep.
One made it to shore, swam, and the other one probably had too much cumbersome clothing on, got weighted down, got caught in a undertow.
One of the guys, I believe, tried to wade back in after him afterwards.
He did.
He was distraught. Probably was not in his right mind at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing you want to do is try to save somebody when they're lost. And, at that point, you got to scale back. You got to, as a warden, I already know probably what happened. The odds of actually, saving that person is little or nothing, but we don't want another victim here.
Right.
So let us do our job.
Right. You could see that guy on camera going into the river. He was going to be another victim.
He was going to be another victim.
Absolutely. There's no question.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to reel him back in.
And that's just human emotion. That's what you want to do.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to keep people back because they don't understand. You end up fighting with them over staying because they're so distraught out of their minds.
Yeah. There's no rational thinking at that point when you experience an encounter or situation like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to process.
Absolutely.
Now, going to the beginning of your career, there's a whole amazing story. It's starting with when you were a young officer, or not. You weren't a young officer. You were a trainee, or somewhere very early on in your career. You encountered a shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And that was called the Draga case.
Yep.
Are you comfortable talking about that these days?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Even after the incident, I went out and I spoke to a lot of groups because I think, and I just talked about this podcast I did today. We got to take everything good that's in the bad situations, try to learn from it, so we can make ourselves better to respond. And especially critical incidents, right about then, we're starting to change. And I was part of changing because it wasn't, suck it up, buttercup anymore. It was, talking about how you're feeling rather than have it build up and have you explode later. Mm. So I think I was right on the cusp of that type of, I don't know if you call it psychology or critical incident debriefing as it started. So I get to experience some of that, and it helped me. That's probably why I have a good full career, is because I went through that process, and I wasn't ordered to, but I was strongly suggested. It might as well have been an order, but, the colonel back then, said, hey, I'm not going to order you to do this, but I want you to do it. You understand what I'm saying? And I'm like, yes, sir. And thank God he did, because it was something new, and we were just starting that, and that's probably why I had a successful 23-year career. Going to a counselor and going through that process as a young warden. It was 1997. I was shot in the line of duty.
Okay.
So
how far into your career were you at that point?
2 years. I hired in 95.
Wow. Mm-hmm. 2 years into a brand new career and some of the worst situations that you can imagine, yet you maintained and retired in the same field.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing, because I think most people would have said, see you later. And in some scenarios, but you said the colonel, you think, had a big part in having you stay on even after a very challenging time. It must have been both physically, because you were injured.
I was out a year.
Yep, and mentally you had to deal with all that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was and even not knowing the stuff I was dealing with.
Right.
Because then through counseling, I could understand, and the feelings. I mean, having an incident in a small town, I used to feel like I'd go into a restaurant and they'd all be talking about me. And guess what, Jay? They were. They really were. Well, it's called the Mark of Cain. Is actually the
Mark of Cain, right?
Yeah,
right.
So everybody knows who you are and what you did, and when I walked into a restaurant, they were talking about me, and it's not so much that they were; it's getting used to it and understanding it, because it's human nature,
right.
And because I could overhear them in a small place, but that was something to get used to right off.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I can hear people's conversations on the other side of a room.
My wife can. I have trouble.
I don't know why.
I can whisper something I don't want her to hear all the way across the house, and she's got it.
It's weird.
She's better than my German Shepherd.
Can you walk us through some of the incidents of the day as you recall?
Yeah, I recall we actually had a fair coming up. August 19th, 1997 is when I was shot. And I've always been a kind of guy that promotes what he does, and I was promoting my district back then, and we didn't have computers to generate anything, so I actually made a map of Coas County, and I separated it according to patrols, and then I took pictures of the guys that patrolled that area, and I put them in there. And I've been working on that in the big auditorium area, and it's not that big in the North Country, but we had one there where people gather into the granite room, they call it, in Lancaster. So I had set that off aside, and I was heading north, and I had some paper from my printer, and it was an August day. It was sunny, and it was a field day in Canada. When I mean a field day, Game Warden field day. So every year or every other year, a state will host a Game Warden field day. And it's kind of, a competition type thing. There's shooting competitions, there's physical competitions. It's a gathering, people that collect patches and badges, and from all over the East Coast, usually people gather. In Canada, Quebec was having a field day. So I was going to get home and get my stuff together, and I was going to head up to Quebec for that field day. But on my way home, I stopped at Kevin Jordan's, who's now the colonel, stopped at his house, and I was out visiting because he was in his front yard as usual, and heard a transmission over a stolen state police cruiser. And I just wanted to get north to help out what I can.
What year is this again?
1997.
Okay.
So in August. Nice sunny day, doors open. So I was going to save this for my podcast, my own podcast, but.
Well, I won't get into it too much because I do want to leave the long version because there's a lot of other details that we'll be able to capture through lots of interviews and things, I think.
Right.
But just to get into some of the details. But I would like the synopsis, because I think this would be a good trailer.
Yeah, a good intro. And,
yes.
And there's been training videos done out there. You can YouTube the training video, which is very accurate and very good for 1997, 98.
Right.
So, but I did that again. It's going to drive me nuts.
Sorry, it doesn't matter.
So I leave there trying to go for a stolen state police cruiser. I encounter it crossing into Vermont, the state of Vermont, and I'm talking to my county dispatch and letting them know that I'm following it. So as I'm following it, Carl Draga sets up an ambush for me. It's a single track underpass. The bridge is an underpass that the train goes over, but it's only made for a single vehicle. As I start going in there, I encounter a state police cruiser pulled off to the right-hand side, and he's sitting out. He's not sitting out there. He's poised with an AR-15 aimed at me, but he has a state police campaign hat on. And, that in itself trips your mind up because your mind's trying to process this.
Yeah, what is that? Because it's not making sense.
That's exactly the feeling I had. It's not
what I'm looking for.
And still to this day,
it's not what I'm not looking for.
Right. And I still pull that image up, and I can, and my head is burned in there, and I still sit there, and, it paused me going as the gun goes off and hits me the first round in the badge.
So he knew that you were after him at that point.
He must have seen me coming north. Okay. I had my blue lights on at the time. Somebody, as I crossed into Vermont, someone yelled, "Turn my blue lights off." Later, I found out it was another officer that was following them inconspicuously so he could, radio details to where he was so other officers could come in and help.
Gotcha.
That was a good idea. I didn't know what was going on, so I got in behind him, but I did turn my lights off at that point.
Yeah. So he fires and shoots and he hits you.
Mm-hmm.
And he hits you in your badge.
In my badge.
What were you thinking at that point?
I had no idea what happened. I felt like I got hit by a 12-gauge shotgun is what I thought.
And were you in the vehicle?
I was in the vehicle.
So he shot through the windshield.
Well, through the windshield, and it hits my badge, goes into my bicep and out my shoulder.
Wow.
And my arm drops into my lap.
And it was a pure ricochet?
The first round was a pure ricochet.
Okay.
Had it penetrated, had it been anything...
You wouldn't be sitting here today.
I wouldn't be sitting here today.
That's mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
You, and he continued to fire?
Yes, that first round I got it in reverse, and I had some training, about, what can stop a bullet on a vehicle. Engine blocks are one thing that'll stop a vehicle, so I got down behind the engine block, and he put about 6 more rounds into my vehicle. As I was backing up, I stopped at the Danville store was there, and there was a bunch of people outside. My windows were down. It was a nice sunny day, and I stuck my head up and yelled at him to get, the blankety blank out of there as I started taking more rounds. About then, that's when my adrenaline kicked in.
Yeah.
And I stomped on it.
Okay.
And I laid rubber right across the intersection. I mean, this is a northern Vermont town that's pretty podunk, so there wasn't a whole lot of cars.
Right.
I went across that intersection, and I backed right into a big, huge tree that I broke right on the edge of the Connecticut River, which was probably a good thing I hit it because I would have ended up in the Connecticut River at the speed I was going.
Right. Was it the deep part of the Connecticut?
There's not real deep parts now.
Okay.
No, down south there would have been.
South, but up north. Yeah.
Up north, there's not that deep of area.
I've fly fished up in the northern region there,
and it's just that area. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. All right, I know exactly.
It's starting to widen out, but not quite. Right. Get down towards the Lancaster area, it starts to get a little deeper.
But you were able to escape the gunfire.
Exactly.
And he said, "Forget this, I'm out of here," kind of thing.
Right, and I didn't know that at that point. I opened my door. I actually fell, I forget how many feet, but I had my shotgun right there. I always kept my shotgun right beside me, but my arm was I couldn't do anything with my arm. It was useless.
Your left arm was...
My left arm was just hanging there. I remember thinking, move, and it wouldn't. It wasn't doing anything.
Wow.
So I just kind of cradled it and dropped down, and then I worked my way up towards that underpass, and I belly crawled into this pricker bushes, and I laid a trap for him if he came to check out my cruiser. I was going to let him get close enough so I could hopefully open up on him.
Wow. No kidding. And he went the other way.
He did. He never came down. Never see what he had finished. So he left.
Wow. Okay.
And I didn't see him leave. And
all right. Well, I think we'll leave the rest of the story for your show.
Okay.
There's a lot to it. I want to get your involvement. And you were hit more than once?
Only once.
Just once. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to show you a picture sometime. Okay. I have my cruiser that we actually ran dowels in it for the first time. I spoke about it was at the Northeast Fishing Game Conference, and we were hosted in it that year. They actually brought my cruiser in, ran these dowels through it. There was holes in the seat to give you the bullet path, and it was. I have those pictures. It's pretty astounding where those bullets went, and thank God I was laying flat, or I would have took probably all 6.
Right. You had the wherewithal to get out of there and react, which is interesting because we talked about the guy in the canoe whose buddy had just drowned, and it's a mesmerizing, overwhelming, emotional state that you have to process information. And this guy was willing to go back in the river, probably would have died too. Yet you are in a fight or flight mode, right? This was your adrenaline's kicking.
Fight and flight.
And flight. You were doing both.
Yeah.
You had to prepare for both. And you said you had some training. What kind of training do you get to prepare yourself for that, or is there none? I mean,
there is, and just your firearms training that you go over and over. I did a 10-week stint for the National Park Service for a seasonal law enforcement law job down in North Carolina, Sylvan, North Carolina. So I did 10 weeks down there. It was basic academy, and it was extremely good. They run a great program down there, probably still do. They bring in the narcs from North Carolina. The guy that ran the narcotics guys down there, he was our chief firearms instructor, and he was just dynamite. So we got some really, really good training there. And then I went to the police academy here in New Hampshire for 10 weeks. So I had 20 weeks of training under my belt. And it's firearms training and, shooting and this and that. And that's what happens when you get in those things. Your training kicks in. Whether you're military, you're police, that's what you've done it, and it's repeat. It's muscle memory.
Okay.
So loading, pulling guns, out of your holster, it was in my hand before I knew it. To this day, sometimes I've pulled gun. I pull a gun and I don't even remember pulling it. It's just your instinct. It's it's time to pull the gun. And it's all of a sudden it's there. It's just that training that you see a gun, you see this course, you see a knife, you pull it out. And sometimes as game wardens, it's difficult because we see so many guns, we see so many knives. Now we're trying to key on what the person's doing and how they're interacting with others more so than the gun or the knife, because we see that all the time. And I had a chief of police ride with me, a good friend of mine. He's like, I don't know how you deal with this day in and day out, seeing all these guns. Every time I see a gun, I'm on edge. And whether we get used to it, because we do get used to it, but we have to rely on other things other than just seeing a gun. Because a police officer sees a gun and he's full on. When we see a gun, that's normal.
Right. Yeah, because as a game warden, everybody you're policing has a gun or a weapon of some sort, generally speaking, unless they're fishing.
Right. And even fishermen carry guns.
Fishermen carry guns or knives of some sort, right? So
exactly.
There's always some potential weapon. So where the patrolman or the police officer, the town police officer, probably isn't encountering that on a daily basis. They're usually just dealing with the people. You got to read the person and the gun. But the gun it sounds like it's not as much of a threat to you because you see it all the time. It's not.
It's the manner in which they're using that or they're acting towards you.
Right.
Is what the game warden has to comprehend. He's not comprehending just the gun. In the academy, the police academy, it was too funny. Steve Toom was my partner. He's a captain now, and as academy people, he's pulling this guy out, arrested him for having a gun in the vehicle, and I'm like, he can have a gun in the vehicle. It's and the instructor's like, who are you with? And I'm like, fishing game. They're like, figures you're a fish cop, because I was right, he was wrong, because he's yarding this guy and arrest him. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, there's a gun in the car. Is it loaded? Oh, I didn't ask him that. Well, you got to ask him that if it's loaded, and then if he has a permit, and the instructors are beside themselves that I'm doing this, and they're like, who are you? What do you work for? I should have known you were a fish cop, because those are all things that they're trying to train those people, but things I already know.
Right. Wow. So that incident, how long did it take you to get back on the job to the point where you were comfortable, both physically and mentally?
Well, it took me a year to get back in uniform.
Okay.
I was 6 months in physical therapy, and I went to the academy while I was doing that too. And that's an amazing year because I took every course except for like one. There was a drug recognition expert I didn't take, because that involved more than I even wanted to do. But I was taking academy classes. I think that year I had 294 hours of academy classes.
Right.
So again, I want to stay busy. I'm not one to sit around. And physical therapy. And I always say my physical therapist was the only woman that's ever made me cry, because she was breaking down that scar tissue in my arm and just putting her thumbs in there and just destroying it. And I'll tell you what, I credit her to this day with what I can do with this arm. It's, besides being weak, it's very functional.
So they're actually physically tearing apart the scar tissue.
Yeah, they are breaking down that scar tissue so it doesn't form. So they're in there.
It doesn't stick and it limit your mobility. Wow.
Yeah.
And never really dawned on me that would be not only just for the repair of a muscle that's injured, but just basic injuries, maybe your shoulder injury or whatever.
Right.
That's the mobility part that you lose when you get injured.
That is exactly right.
Wow.
Yeah, and it is painful, I will tell you that.
I bet.
It is excruciating. So the old tears would run down my eyes, but she did an awesome job.
Wow.
Yeah. So
it's crazy.
Physical therapy, I'm a firm believer in it, and I'm a success because of it.
Right. Do you have full function of your arm now?
It's weak.
It's weak. Okay.
It weaks.
Okay.
Yeah. And my other arm has taken the beating for that. I just did an MRI on that side, and they were like, "You're pretty rough on this arm." I'm like, "Well, when you got one that's shot, the other one takes up the slack." And the doc's like, "Yeah, I guess you're right, Wayne."
Right. Yeah.
So
what are you gonna do there?
Exactly.
Do you?
I'm not complaining, Lynn. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. No, you've never really been a complainer from as long as I've known you.
No. I'm thankful every day that I'm here.
When you in our pregame conversation, you had showed me a picture, and you just recently posted a picture of your badges on Instagram. One is a complete badge. The other one is the one that captured or ricocheted the bullet. The badge, a portion of it is torn off from the bullet, and as you described, it drove some of the metal from your badge into your chest, and there's blood on the badge. It's your blood, still to this day, hanging at Fish and Game, correct?
Yes, correct.
What else happened? So tell me about the badge. It sunk into your chest?
Yeah, actually, it kind of mushroomed out, and it penetrated my chest, and at the hospital, when they went to take off my shirt, they couldn't. So they actually had to cut around my badge and leave that portion of my shirt on there until the doctor could remove it.
Wow.
So, and he had to go in there and, kind of...
surgery?
I won't even call it surgery. I mean, he kind of worked it out and popped it out.
Actually came.
But I still carry a scar right there where my badge was, where it penetrated.
Right.
Even, it's kind of weird because even the pin, you can actually see the pin where the pin was. So I don't know if it got pushed in so far or the pin actually indented.
Right.
So, and not as much as then, I mean, 23, 24 years later, it's not the scar it used to be, but it's still there.
Right.
Oh.
Wow. Now, from that day, and 97 was, quite a ways from today. It was a while ago. There were, as time, if you go back in time, and I learned some of this stuff on your podcast, and
well, I'm glad.
Listening to like the beginning phases of the Fish and Game job, not only in New Hampshire but across the country, it was pretty primitive. I mean, it sounded like you might have got a car. You got a ticket or a booklet of tickets is what I think they were referred to on your most recent podcast. And you got a badge, maybe? I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure if you got any training. I'd like to talk a little bit about how life has changed for the Fish and Game officer, and I know there's a bunch of different names.
Oh my goodness!
There's game cop.
Yeah.
There's Fish and Game officer. There's I don't know. There's endless names to your profession.
Oh, absolutely.
What are some of your favorites?
Twig Pig could be, responded to a ranger as well.
Okay.
But that was one that...
Game Warden,
Trout Trooper. That's pretty common.
Right.
Those types of things. And, none of them faze me. My Trout Trooper's cool.
Right.
Game
Warden's the classic, I guess. But
it's the one... Pennsylvania actually just changed back to a Game Warden, and they actually did a study. They took a panel of people and asked them what a game warden was, asked him what a environmental police officer was, and asked him what a conservation officer was. They put all these names in front of a blank panel ranging from different ages. They all knew what a game warden was.
Interesting.
They all associated with the game warden, so Pennsylvania has rebranded themselves as a state game warden.
Game warden. And what were they before?
Good question. That's a good question.
Okay. It is interesting. So, Game Warden to me feels right.
Mm-hmm.
And is that your preferential?
It's my preference. That's why it's Warden's Watch.
Warden's Watch, right.
Although I have been confused with prison wardens.
Right, and I can see that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a similar line
It's a similar.
of work, right? Yeah, I can see that. So how have things changed? Were there any technology advancement because of that incident that day? What have changed from 1997 or when you first got in to what is available to the Game Warden today?
Right. There was a lot of changes as a result of my incident. Some of them were awesome, and others they tried. And one was the one they tried was the radio system.
Okay.
Fish and Game had a really good radio system. Not a ton of repeaters, but we could cover the state, and it was all analog. So communication was fairly good. We went to a digital system because of the Draga case, and they also had so they could isolate certain frequencies and things like that so they could talk without, the assailant hearing them,
right,
so to speak. It was a great idea, great plan. It didn't really work. It is just getting to the point now where communications are getting better and better. And I'm not going to say it's a radio system. I'm going to tell you it's a cell phone system.
Okay.
Because that's what the radio system needed is a whole bunch more towers to make it work.
Right.
And that's what this cell phone system is getting now. And
gotcha.
Communication, as a supervisor, I don't care how you communicate as long as you can communicate. Mm-hmm. I always, heard on a few other podcasts, I promoted my guys to work together. I think you get more out of guys when they work together. There's two sets of eyes on cases, there's two sets of hands, and it's a whole lot safer when you're so remote.
Right.
So if it takes you a while to drive, I don't care. Work together. It's fun. I think I get more out of people when they're working together. And there's a lot less chance of a guy pulling on a gun on two wardens than one.
Good point. Yeah, that would be like you got to really be off your game, or you have to be processing something. You're not processing at all if you're trying to pull a gun on two police officers, period, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
Even to somebody that's deranged mentally to do so. But I can see, if you have that, if you had to do it all over again, what would you have changed about that scenario? Now that you've been the boss of a lot of these guys, would you have altered some of the circumstances of that day?
Yeah, I like to put out information to everybody. And again, with the radio system the way it was a struggle even then, communication. But to put out that information, what had occurred. Certainly, Carl Draga knew he just killed 4 people.
Okay.
For us to know that would have been probably a game changer.
Right.
So, because when I got shot, I had no idea what this guy had done up to that point. I just knew he stole a state police cruiser.
Wow.
And that sixth sense, and I believe in that sixth sense because I've had it happen to me a few other times, that something just wasn't right. And, that day when I get that intersection, I looked all 3 ways, and I could tell somebody had just pulled off to the right-hand side of the underpass because there was dirt hanging in the air. In the other ways, I should have been able to see his taillights or the car moving in that direction. And I couldn't, and I'm like, that's just kind of odd that, he's trying to hide from me or what. So when I went under that railroad pass, I went very slow, very methodically. I didn't just go driving through. I went, right in there, kind of inching forward until I actually saw him. They call it cutting the pie, going around a corner. You kind of peek until you see something.
Okay.
And I was kind of doing that with my cruiser, but it was too late because, again, when I saw what I saw, I was like, wasn't comprehending a state police, Stetson on the guy's head with an AR-15 pointing at me. That just tells me, is it a friend? Is it a foe? Is it,
right, because you see friendly letters.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if this is...
And that had to be his intention the whole time. That was...
Decoy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was an ambush and to throw the person off because am I going to shoot a trooper?
Right.
No, and it starts to throw that doubt in there.
Mm-hmm. Man, I can't...
Yeah,
it's an unimaginable day.
Yeah,
like it's crazy. You've had a very fulfilling career, and that's kind of how it started in a sense. It may have been one of your most amazing stories of your career, but you've got some more. I know you've got a lot of different stories to tell.
Yeah.
And I've heard some of them on your show. When do you think, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot in here, and you can tell me if I am, when do you think you might get to producing the whole story of the Dreget case?
I'm thinking I'm a year out because I want to do it right, Jay.
Okay.
I want to do it right, and I'm not sure how to do that yet. What to include, what not to include. It's a massive story when you start digging into it because it affected so many people in the North Country. And everybody that was in the North Country that day, some people in the Southern, they almost remember. It's almost like a 9/11 incident. Mm-hmm. They remember that day. The troopers that were on, the Border Patrol guys were on. They still remember that day. The people that responded, troopers, police, Vermont police, Maine police responded. It was an incredible response to the incident. And then it had such an impact on the community because we lost, 2 troopers, a judge, and Dennis Jose, who was a real hero in the whole thing, and he was an editor for the local newspaper. So everybody seems to remember where they were. There's some people that had, sights and scenes that were right there, saw those things. So I'm working on it. I'm trying to figure out what's the best way because for those victims, I want to do it right.
Right.
And do I even talk about their story or would I just talk about mine?
Gotcha.
So I'm still in that thought process.
Okay. And I'm just asking because I think people will hear this and they're like, I want
more.
When is Wayne doing that on his podcast? Yeah, because it's a fascinating story. I'm sorry it happened just because of the way things went down. Mm-hmm. But I think we learned a lot from it. And
it was a tragedy.
It was a tragedy.
No doubt.
Yeah.
We lost, I lost 2 extremely close friends.
Right.
I worked with Scott Phillips the day before.
Yep.
We were at a wedding that weekend before.
Yep.
Les Lord and I, we had a similar laugh. People, he was just a really, really great guy.
Right.
Used to have coffee with him every morning. We'd have a coffee, in the morning. We'd all meet for breakfast or coffee at the local place and have coffee, and Les was usually there.
Right. Yeah, it was definitely one of those tragedies in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's got to be up there with one of the worst scenarios in New Hampshire that I can think of. I'm not sure there are many others where you have a mass shooting like that.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Right.
Right.
It's probably. Somebody told me until this motorcycle accident, it was like the most people lost in a single incident for a shooting incident. It probably still is a shooting incident. And then we had that in the North Country maybe because we had that motorcycle accident with the 7 veterans recently. And that was another one that the numbers, it was the biggest motor vehicle accident in the North Country.
Right. Definitely something we don't ever want to go through again.
Right.
In any circumstance.
And lessons learned, and there's a lot of training out there now for officers. It is a different world we live in because of those types of incident nationwide. That we are more responsive, better armed. The other thing that happened, you asked me things that happened. We went to a Mini 14. We had a 257 Roberts was my issued firearm, bolt action. It was great for putting down deer, great for shooting long distance. Mm-hmm. But as a weapon to combat somebody with an AR-15, it probably wasn't the right weapon. So we went to Ruger Mini 14s with a red dot sight on them, and then we trained with those. And, pretty good weapon. And we were on the cutting edge of that because our colonel then said, hey, I want my guys to have something else. So before everybody got their AR-15s, we had Mini 14s, and they were an outstanding gun. We trained with them. I'm so much better with a Mini 14 than I'm an AR because I haven't gone through all that training.
Right.
And I'm jealous of these guys that get issued the AR because they're going through all the rifle training.
What's different about the Mini?
It's just a little different operating system. The bolts on the side, not on the rear. The latches are a little bit different. The Mini 14's a little looser gun, I think. It's not as tight. You can get away with a little more things. But otherwise, it's a good ranch rifle. It's a good, sturdy weapon.
Do you think the big AR is better than the Mini?
I think because the compactness of it, yes, because you can put that sliding stock in and make it pretty compact.
Gotcha, okay.
And I say that because if you have to shoot from a vehicle, that might be a big thing that helps you, but to slide that stock in and be able to shoot from a vehicle, which is something else that day could have brought about, probably engaging from a vehicle maybe.
Right. Has any of the technology or the gear that you wear, like bulletproof vests, things like that? The car is more bulletproof than before?
The cars aren't, but we never wore vests.
Okay.
And they're not bulletproof. They're bullet resistant. Some will take it, some won't.
Yeah, I use it generally.
And that's a general term that everybody uses, bulletproof. But they're far from bulletproof if you're using the right ammo.
I agree. Yeah, you can always penetrate with the right.
Exactly. The handguns are generally stopped by those vests, and rifles, shotgun slugs. Start getting up to the rifles, and it's a little more. You have to steel plates and things like that. Yeah. Which a lot of them have now. A lot of them have in the right spots where you need them. So we weren't issued those at the time. Shortly thereafter, everybody got issued a vest. Okay. And then since then, we've kept up with them. And every 5 years, usually the guys get all new vests. And they have come to wear them. I will say, even towards the end of my career, I didn't wear mine a whole lot. So, I
guess in general, it's not necessary.
In general, I'm kind of jealous because I see some of these vests that are on the outside now, and as a lieutenant, that would have been nice to slide off, sit there, and then slide back on when you're going out. Yeah, because all day in the office, or even a half day in the office, if you're wearing that, it's just it's not the most comfortable thing. Right. And I'd like to think I would wear an outside one that looks exactly like the shirt you're wearing a little more, but I never experienced it, so I can't tell you.
Right. Gotcha. I mean, it seems like it would add some weight to your
day. And sweat. And hot days, it's hot.
Right. Which kind of brings me to and I definitely have to get into your podcast, but this brings me to the next topics of conversation here. To be a game warden there are lots of different facets of the job. Right? Mm-hmm. There's many different things that you are responsible for. I've heard in some podcasts I think you coined it maybe, that you are the Swiss Army knife of the police force. Yes. You have everything in your truck, in your gear. You've got all kinds of different things to adapt to different circumstances. Right. There's also this physicality of being a game warden and I've never gone through a police academy. My brother's a police officer. I have lots of friends that are police officers, but I don't know how demanding a patrolman is versus fish and game. But it seems like as a fish and game officer, yes, you're driving to a location, but you've got search and rescue missions that you do. You have to hike up and down mountains, I'm sure. And you're in New Hampshire, which can be a mountainous territory, depending on where in the state you are.
For sure.
Certainly other states are flat, and other states have even bigger mountains than New Hampshire. But in New Hampshire, for sure, you have to be, I think, in shape. I mean, they're hiking up and down a mountain for your job is very physically demanding. That's just where it begins. Yes. How do you keep yourself in shape? What do guys do to maintain? I've never seen an overweight game warden, I guess, is...
No, and I don't think you ever will either.
Right. Because, you guys, knowing where I hunt, I go out in the middle of nowhere. And oftentimes, I'm hiking up a mountain, I get winded. And you guys need to get there for all kinds of reasons. Whether routine checks, some kind of an accident, some kind of a lost hunter. You got to get there. And yes, you have groups, but it's physically demanding. What were some of the requirements that you had to keep and maintain your ability to stay in shape?
Well, when I first came on, there's no standards, but the police standards and training actually was enacted through a law that the police officers in general have to do a 3-year physical fitness now in the state of New Hampshire in order to keep their jobs. Wow. So that's statewide, so you probably won't ever see another fat cop. Right. Whether he likes donuts or not, because I do like donuts.
Well, when you're burning off calories, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You're right. As you get older, it does. Right. But, certainly when the time frame that I got hired, that wasn't a requirement at all. But you're right. You want to be physically fit when you get out to those incidents for sure. But the job kept you in shape because you were constantly, especially being a North Country warden, you were doing search and rescue all the time. You were in the woods all the time, hiking here, hiking there, looking for this, doing that, loading boats, unloading boats, snow machining. Snow machine's wicked physical, especially when you do it day in and day out. You're hitting moguls, your body is constantly working on a snow machine. It's shifting, it's moving, so that's very physically demanding.
Never thought of that. Yeah, I mean, you think of riding on a snowmobile as just fun and joyous, but there's some physical demand there.
Oh, and driving one fast to get to places with your blue lights on, responding to accidents.
Right.
Never mind, the pursuits you have to have.
Right.
So it is a physically demanding
all year long
sport. Yeah.
I mean, you just
four-wheelers are the same. It just, banging, leaning. It's all year long. Absolutely. Stocking fish, grabbing fish out of the pickup, out of the truck.
It's almost
running down to the shoreline and dumping them in.
The job keeps you fit.
It does.
In a lot of ways.
It does.
And so you have to be fit to go into the job, but you also have to maintain the fitness. But the job will keep you fit along the way, generally speaking. Okay. Let's talk about some other cases that you've worked that are. I mean, I don't know how many years you spend in the force.
23.
23. You got 23 years of amazing stories.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of a couple that come to mind off the top of your head? There's some of the classics that you'd like to tell.
Well, some of the classics I told in my second podcast, the Warden's best cases, and that was all within a 24-hour span, and I'll never forget that because it certainly highlights my career. Some of the other ones, we got to an opportunity to work the Canadian border, and for New Hampshire, we do this grant called Stone Garden, which is like a border protection type thing, in conjunction with the Border Patrol. What that did for us in the early years was help us get more personnel on the Canadian border to operate. I always knew that the Canadians were probably up to no good on the border, but we had so much work to do within New Hampshire because it always had an opening day of moose season the same day the Canadians opened up, or similar moose seasons. So all our resources were going to the New Hampshire hunt and not to pay attention to the border. Once we got that grant, I was able to, and I worked with Border Patrol a lot on this grant, and we were able to get some money, get some officers allocated for that Border Patrol detail, and I set up an overnight detail. So Matt Holmes, Adam Cheney, and I got up there, and we slept on the border the night before the Canadian moose season opening.
Yep.
And it got down to 18 degrees, Jay. Yeah, that wasn't in my plan.
No.
It got cold, and we were sleeping. We're like, they call it the slash. Our border between Canada, it looks like somebody mowed it with a bush hog, and they call that the slash. That's no man's land. So that's neither the U.S. or Canada's. So we just camped on our side and the U.S. side just off of the slash. So about daybreak opens up, and I can hear some guys out on the slash. I'm assuming Canadian moose hunters, which they were. Adam Cheney is snoring. He's all snuggled up, and he's snoring away. I got to stop Adam from snoring, so I grab my water bottle, and I throw it at him, and I whack him right in the head. Yeah, my water bottle wasn't like the soft water bottle, like half-drunk water bottle that you expect. It was frozen solid, and I whacked him in the head with a frozen bottle of water. And I drank half of it, so I just thought it was going to be that soft, slushy.
Of course.
Yeah, and it bonked him solid, whack.
Right.
It stopped him from snoring and also sat him right up, and that fight or flight, he was going to fight.
He was looking for a fight. I was just about to say that. He was looking to start swinging.
So that starts the day off, and then we hear some shooting going on. And we've been out there all night, so we have other teams coming in. But we wanted to be there for first light so we get all the activity. And basically we radio to the other guys where the activity is. We heard shots, and it's in this area. And Chris Egan's actually on one of the teams, and he's the Pittsburgh Game Warden. He knows this area really good. So they get to this area, and they encounter these Canadians in the slash. And they have their ATV and their trailer, and they're heading into New Hampshire. Unfortunately, or fortunately for them, they got caught in the slash, which is no man's land. Had we been 10 minutes later, they would have been in the state of New Hampshire where they shot these moose. So they shot moose basically in New Hampshire. Their stands were set up to look in New Hampshire. They killed a bull and a calf moose, and they were on their way to get it. And we stopped them before that, but we also charged them for shooting those moose in New Hampshire because they were in the States and not in Canada.
Right.
And the Border Patrol was with us because that was one of the things. They were with the teams coming in. So they were there, and that was a long day because we had to get the Canadian Game Wardens down there, and they interpreted it for us.
Because they were French speaking.
They were French speaking. Even if they could say English, they probably wouldn't. So we got some bilingual Quebec wardens down there to translate, to help us out with that situation, which was great. It just took us a while. And I had let the Canadians know that we were going to be operating in that area as well. So they were fairly close compared to what they would have been.
Yes.
So they were only 3 hours away compared to, it would have been maybe all day.
Right.
So once we broke down the communication, we charged those guys, and basically they were going to come to the States to come to court because they wouldn't ever be able to cross the border again, and some of them did business in the United States, so that was really important. So we had something to hang over their head.
Right.
And we took the moose back through the States. I have a great picture of that too. The whole crew with that we parted out the moose and brought it back, and that was a job in itself because how to get to that area was a challenge.
Right.
But it was a great case. We made an international case basically.
Right. Yeah, we've got international issues going on here.
I think we set the stage for the future because we have never made a case like that. And we've spent a lot of time on the border thanks to Stone Garden in that work. And it also works for them, too, because, if you're running drugs on the border and everything, and to know the game wardens are up there on the border certainly is a deterrent, as well as violating, fish and game law and everything else. So just having those assets in the woods on our border in New Hampshire has a lot of woods border. We don't have very much border that's accessible via vehicle. We have one port that comes through, and the rest of it's woods, and it's gnarly woods. So, but it's fun. That was a great case that I was able to put together and not only participate in but administrate too, and to see something come out of that you put together. And Chris Egan was the star of that because he took the blood trail from where they shot him and was able to lay that all out. And he's a good investigator, and he put that case all together. And
wow,
so that was
a good one.
And I got another one that I'll tell you with Chris Egan and Adam Cheney, and sometimes they're going to have to tell their side of the story too.
All right. Let's tell that story in a sec.
Okay.
I want to get in a couple other little things. Let's give everybody a little break so that they can get ready for the next.
Man,
you got so many.
So many.
But just kind of thinking about that case, or just in general, kind of a side tangent. What's your protocol for investigation, or is there one? Is everything like improvised, or is it? I mean, do you have a certain number of things that you have to like check off the list to go through an investigation of sorts?
No.
Maybe it's way more fluid than I think it is.
It is. It's more fluid, and it's officer dependent.
Okay.
And what I mean, some guys are lousy investigators.
Gotcha.
Some guys are great ticket writers. They're great go-to guys, but they're not investigators. So when you tell them a story, they don't care because they already got a ticket they're writing you, and they're not going to go beyond that to find out what else. But if you're writing, the guy's writing you a ticket, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I was over there, and he's like, why were you over there? Because that's the investigator. He's going, well, why were you there? Well, and then he's going to start catching you in inconsistencies, and then he's going to start spinning those, and then he's going to try to match evidence to what you're saying. And the nice thing is to have a group of those types of people. If you have a guy that's good at both of them, that's awesome, but to pair up people that are really good investigators and really good workers. And Chris Egan and Adam Cheney work side by each, Colebrook and Pittsburgh. Adam was an incredible worker, still is to this day. Chris is a wicked investigator. And to have those two work as a team together is unstoppable. They know their weaknesses. They know their strengths. And then I'll give you a good little thing, snowmobile running radar. Adam, Chris working together. They get 4 guys stopped. Chris starts explaining everything to them and talking to them. Adam gets all 4 licenses and writes 4 tickets and hands them. And I'm standing there too. I think I met him in a cruiser that day. Hands each of them their pink copy of the thing and says, when this officer's done talking to you, he will explain the back of those tickets. And then he drives off. And Chris looks at me. He goes, did he just do what I think he did? And I started laughing. I'm like, yes, he did. Because Adam's the doer. Right. The crime's been committed. He's not going to talk to you. He's going to be effective. He's going to write out his ticket. He's going to go, and he's going to go back to work. Right. Chris is going to explain it and why we want you to drive slow and this and that, which is a great thing too. To put those guys together is priceless. Right. So, and they each know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and Adam knew exactly what that was. Another good Adam Cheney story, accident that the guy's unconscious in the hospital. Failure to keep right and reduce speed, hit a tree, I think that was the case maybe, or something like that. I always liked with an accident, I like a ticket written as a supervisor. That makes it very clear whose fault it is.
Right.
So whether it was your fault or somebody's, especially when there's two people involved, you need to find fault with somebody. That's our job. So you investigate that accident and you find fault and you write a ticket, and that's how you write a ticket. I don't know how many attorneys I've talked to over ATV accidents, and I'll say, well, I wrote your client a ticket, and there's this long pause. They're like, you wrote my client a ticket? I said, yes, he was at fault. I found him at fault, and this is why. And I never get calls back from those attorneys. So Adam writes a ticket. The guy's unconscious. He finds his wallet and stuffs the ticket in his wallet and tells the nurse when he gets conscious to let him know the ticket's in his wallet. He was served. Right. He was notified, but that's getting the job done effectively. Right. And I got no problem with that. Chris would have made sure he met with that person when he was conscious and gone through everything. It's just a different way of doing business. Right. And Chris, being the investigator, I mean, he doesn't let anything go. Even if he gets that initial ticket and there's something wrong there, he's gonna ask. He's gonna look into it, and then he's gonna pick that apart. And then when he finds out that that's a bunch of baloney, he's gonna continue on, and he goes from a violation to a felony case. Right. Because that's the investigator in him. And I love investigations. I just think it's really neat to start with nothing and come up with a really good case and figure that out. Right. To me, I love that part of it. So and that's what. But I like the other things. I like the quick, easy things too. Yeah.
So there's no real investigation protocol per se. It's just based off of the investigator. And we discussed this a little bit earlier. You said that you have to be able to read people, mannerisms. You have to be able to tell if somebody's lying to you or not.
Exactly.
Right? So how do you start processing that? Was it a training thing, or is it something that you just kind of picked up over time?
There are certainly trainings for investigations, and generally all the officers go to them. And even those guys that aren't good with investigations do investigations. Don't get me. There's just some things you develop as specialties. So, certainly Adam Cheney could investigate a case, and I'd be very confident that he did it. But, Chris, they would make one of those, maybe something most people wouldn't catch, or even most officers might not catch, that's just something a little off. And it is. It's reading. Something just isn't quite there. It's how they said it. It's why they said it. And some of the training in interview and interrogation school, we actually have classes in that on how people are relaxed. If people are good at lying, it's hard to detect. If they believe it themselves, it's very hard to detect. But when they're trying to cover up something or keep something from you, there's always those idiosyncrasies they're doing. They're not saying something right. And the best thing is the truth is always consistent. You and I know that. We know it with our kids. The truth is always consistent, because I can tell you the same story I told you before, because that's the way it happened. Right. When people start to lie and give alibis and things like that, it changes. And Todd Shefchuk, I came on with Todd. I did an interview with Todd. You heard the podcast with Todd. He would wait 3 years and go back and investigate these cases.
Really?
And he's like, people can't remember their lies 3 years ago.
That's a good point.
What did I tell him then?
Right.
And he's got it all written down. He's got it all documented, what you told me. Yeah, 3 years later, he goes back and, tell me what happened again. And again, the truth always is the same, and the lies never are. And the inconsistencies he would get he'd break cases that way.
That's fascinating. So because you think about it, if you tried to lie, you really can remember the exact circumstances of how things transpired almost to a T.
Right.
But if you try to make up something in there, it's almost like your brain fills in the blanks with this make-believe. And the make-believe will morph over time because you don't have an exact...
Because it's not real.
Yeah, you don't have a visual or an audio remembrance or a touch. All your sensory mechanisms
didn't happen.
So you're just making it up. Now you're just using your brain.
Exactly.
The brain's going to redesign that. But everything that actually happened, everything you could see, touch, feel, smell, That's all the real stuff.
And then you start matching that with evidence.
Right.
Or the inconsistencies aren't, the evidence shows me the deer was shot here, and you said it was shot over there.
Right.
And they're like, I get maybe it was shot there.
Right.
And where'd you shoot the deer? I shot it through the heart.
Right.
Well, this deer was shot through the head. And how do you mess that up?
Right.
And then you start breaking them apart, and finally they either give up or you take all that circumstantial evidence and you make a case out of it, and you bring it for a judge, and he makes a decision because he sees the inconsistencies and the lies and everything, and that's how we find people guilty based on evidence.
So I think in like this most recent deer that I killed, I'll be able to tell that story forever because it all was real. I can tell you what time of day it was. I can tell you where I shot it. I can tell you what happened just before I shot, how I got there, the path I took to get out, if it was raining or not. I can tell you what kind of moisture was on the ground. Little details. I can tell you that I moved from one tree to another tree, and I didn't like that tree either, so I backed up into the more shadows on a stump. That was better than the tree I was sitting on. And I can tell you exactly what tree I was sitting on. I can bring you back to the exact spot. I can tell you exactly where that deer fell. Those are things you can remember, but if I tried to fabricate that 3 years later, not so much.
No.
That's really cool. How many times have you use that strategy to your ability or to your investigations to try to trick or not? You're not tricking them.
You're investigating. You're finding the facts.
Yeah, because that brings up another topic of I've heard you talk about this in your podcast about entrapment versus
giving them opportunities.
I want to get into that in a sec. How many times have you used that technique when you're trying to solve the case?
Quite a bit. Okay. I didn't have to go back a whole lot. I usually tried to solve it then. I'm the first 48 guy. I like to get all that evidence and wrap it up. Todd Shefchuk did a great job. He used to take his cold cases and go regurgitate them. The cold cases I had, I really didn't have a whole lot of leads because I would track down my leads, and I generally, and I'm not trying to be cocky or anything, but I usually can get my case and get it all together then.
Okay.
The cases that I didn't get, I didn't have a whole lot of evidence.
Right.
And I was trying to develop that evidence and work different angles to develop evidence so I could do that type of thing. Yep. But I remember, and it's in my second podcast, my best cases, when I had the guy shoot the deer out of the back door. He hands me a gun that has dust all over it, a dust over the trigger. This is what I used. And I'm like, this is dusty. Yeah, that's the gun I used. I'm like, this dust on the trigger. Right. Nope, that's the gun I used. He knows he's going to lose that weapon.
Right.
So when that deer goes to the butcher that I know, I say, Bruce, I need a round out of this deer. Give me a round out of this deer. And he got me a round out of that deer. And it was a 243.
Okay.
So guess what? I did a search warrant again and went back and knocked on his house and said, that gun you gave me? That wasn't the gun.
Right.
I knew it wasn't the gun. He knew it wasn't the gun. But he wasn't going to tell me that wasn't the gun. Would I have gone back later? He would have stuck with that story because he knew which gun I gave him.
Right.
But now I have a round that doesn't even come close to a 22. It's a 243. And
so he handed you a 22?
22.
Wow.
He probably thought the 243 went right through the deer.
Right.
Which is totally possible. It hit the shoulder on the far side, and it was nice because it kind of mushroomed out, but the base of it was perfect. You could put a mic on it, a micrometer, and figure that out very, very quickly.
Right.
It wasn't even that hard, and then do a search warrant for the 243.
Yep.
And then I gave him, I was a gentleman. I'm like, you can get me the gun, or I can toss your house.
Right.
So he goes and gets me the gun.
There you go. To me, that's a very fine detail that you like. Nope. So you've got
but I knew there was a crack, and that's what I wanted. I knew that wasn't the gun.
You knew it wasn't the gun. Was it because of the dust, or was it?
It was the dust.
It was the dust. Like this gun hasn't been touched.
Yeah. If that had been clean as a whistle, I probably would have been hook, line, and sinker on it.
Right. Or at least you would have potentially looked at it more. Right.
I still would have liked a round out of the deer.
Of course.
And then I would have, but I really wanted a round out of this deer.
Right. Right. And that makes sense because you can really put it all together.
Mm-hmm.
So people can tune in. Where can we find your podcast on social media, Instagram, all those places?
Yeah, all those places is right. Certainly, Apple Podcasts is probably the number one download. Spotify, Radio Public, Facebook, wardenswatch.com. You can actually go to wardenswatch.com and click on it and subscribe there as well. But as you know, subscribe helps me out because when there's a new episode out, it drops and you get it. And you get to hear some of the other Game Warden stories, not just mine.
Well, thanks to Wayne for coming on the show. Please stay tuned for part 2. And you can get that part 2 early over on our Patreon channel. That's patreon.com/Big Buck Registry. You can find some other little bonuses and tidbits over there at different tiers, and we hope you enjoy. But if you'd want to wait a couple of weeks, we'll have part 2 out just for you. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter @ChasingAntler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you? Or you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay. I'm Dusty Phillips.
And I'm Jay Sky Ammann. We'll see you next time right here on the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunt Podcast.